Oil and gas, the lifeblood of the global economy. Those with abundant reserves of fossil fuels can grow rich, but only if they can get it out of the ground and to market, before the wolves and the jackals descend. In this video, we explore the Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC, six nations that reside on some of the most valuable land on Earth, the Arabian Peninsula. Surrounded on all sides by conflict and chaos, the countries of the GCC manage to exist in relative peace and stability. Long aligned with the global hegemon, the United States of America, these Gulf monarchies have managed to convert the vast oil and gas reserves that lie beneath their sands into tremendous wealth and global influence. Most of their neighbors, in contrast, weren't so lucky. We'll also compare the Gulf petro-kingdoms with 9 other petrostates scattered across 4 continents in order to quantitatively rank these countries and find out who is the strongest petrostate. The Gulf Cooperation Council is dominated by Saudi Arabia, controlling 50% of the GDP of the Gulf nations and accounting for 62% of the bloc's population. Saudi Arabia is the unanimous king amongst kings. The Saudis have used their vast wealth to acquire large quantities of expensive and sophisticated U.S. military hardware. If we examine the global firepower military strength rankings, we find that Saudi Arabia sits well above the runner-up, the United Arab Emirates or the UAE, when it comes to military strength, with the remaining 4 members being left far behind. When assessing GDP, we find a similar picture. The 2023 GDP of Saudi Arabia just passes the $1 trillion mark, with this number dropping in half for the UAE and then dropping by half once more for Qatar. The remaining 3 nations, Bahrain, Oman, and Kuwait, account for only 15% of Gulf GDP. The population breakdown is even more one-sided. The population of Saudi Arabia is approximately 37 million, almost 4 times greater than the UAE and 25 times larger than the smallest Gulf nation of Bahrain. The Gulf countries manage fairly stable economic growth despite their high dependence on energy exports. If we examine the GDP time series, we find that Bahrain and Saudi Arabia have very stable GDP growth with R-squared values greater than 0.9. For these countries, diversification initiatives and strategic overseas investments have reduced economic volatility in the face of commodity swings. Kuwait, on the other hand, is the least diversified, and this shows up in the GDP growth data. Petrostates that fail to diversify their economies will face irregular growth during times of low energy prices. If we examine the World Bank Energy Index, we see that the period from 2014 to 2020 was marked by a commodity price shock. If we overlay this energy index against the GDP of Kuwait, we see the consequences that come from a lack of economic diversity. The United Arab Emirates, home to Dubai, its low taxes, a magnet for wealthy foreigners and business startups, ranks the highest on the Global Economic Diversification Index for the Gulf nations, Kuwait the lowest. Next, we'll broaden our scope to include 9 other petrostates spanning 4 continents: Europe, South America, Africa, and Asia. Russia, the world's largest country, boasts immense natural resource reserves as well as the second highest ranked military in the world. If you are to keep your natural resources and live to profit off of them, you must defend them from conventional military attack as well as other more exotic means of expropriation. In Europe's Scandinavian north, we have the ultra-wealthy Norway with its unique system of petro-socialism, boasting some of the highest human development metrics in the world. It is a testament to what can be achieved if the resource curse and the kleptocracy that often results therefrom can be avoided. On the South American continent, we have Brazil and Venezuela, the latter a testament to the chaos that results from South American-style socialism. Whether this chaos results directly from the socialist system or as a result of the destabilizing sanctions and interference one will face when embarking down such a foolish path too near America's backyard is yours to decide. On the Africa side of things, we have Nigeria and Algeria. Nigeria has the highest population of the group, 224 million, while also having the lowest score by far on the Human Development Index. In North Africa sits Algeria, its powerful military surpassing even the mighty Saudis on the global firepower rank. In the West Asian Caucasus region, we have the post-Soviet country of Azerbaijan. Its highly strategic location on the shores of the Caspian Sea is a crucial transport corridor for all manners of goods and natural resources in the region. Then, in the Middle East, lying to the north of the Gulf countries, we have Iran and Iraq. The former, Iran, a longtime enemy of the Gulf states, with its Islamic theocracy posing a particular threat to the Gulf monarchies, and Iraq, a country marked by almost 40 years of continuous and destructive war. The geopolitics of oil, it turns out, is a zero-sum game. Oil kept in the ground of one country, whether via sanctions or outright war, assures a high and stable price for those who can court stability. If we examine 2023 GDP, we find that Brazil, Russia, and the Gulf bloc all sit around the $2 trillion mark. Saudi Arabia sits head and shoulders above the other Gulf states at $1 trillion of GDP. We can note that the Saudi corporation, Saudi Aramco, cracks the global top 10 for corporations by market cap. After the Saudis, we have the middle group with a GDP of around 400 to 500 billion. We then taper down to Bahrain, the smallest GDP of the set. We should note that the more recent economic data for Venezuela, as a result of its political instability, is not present in the World Bank dataset, so data for Venezuela will be reported for the year 2014 when necessary. The population distribution is also top-heavy, with Nigeria, Brazil, and Russia accounting for 2/3 of the set's population. Iran has a population of around 90 million, while the rest of the countries have populations smaller than 50 million. The other Gulf states, along with Norway, have very small populations of less than 10 million. If we examine GDP per capita and PPP gross national income per capita, we find that Norway, along with the Gulf states, are by far the richest on a per capita basis. An easy equation to understand: a lot of natural resources spread out over very few people can lead to tremendous wealth. If we examine the total oil and gas production per capita, we find that these same countries have the highest amount of energy production on a terajoule basis per capita. Qatar, Kuwait, and Norway boast exceptionally high energy production per capita. If we compare Qatar to Nigeria, we find that the amount of energy produced per Qatari is around 170 times higher than for every Nigerian. Natural resource rents, or NRR, represents the profit that a country makes from extracting and selling its natural resources. Examining natural resource rents as a percentage of GDP, we can see to what extent these countries are dependent on their natural resources. Iraq and Kuwait are the most dependent, with around 40% of GDP coming from natural resource rents. The rest of the Gulf states are more diversified, with Bahrain relying the least on its natural resources. The advanced economy of Norway, along with Brazil, boasts the lowest dependence. Unfortunately, having a large supply of valuable natural resources, like oil and gas, can make you a target for malign foreign interference or internal political struggle. If we examine political stability, we find that Norway has the highest political stability, followed by the Gulf states. War-torn Iraq is at the very bottom. The deterrent of a strong military helps to dissuade your rivals from making moves on your precious oil and gas reserves. If your military strength is great enough, it even enables you to have designs on the natural resources of your rivals. Here, Russia stands above all the others, with the exception of the United States of America. Brazil, Iran, Algeria, and Saudi Arabia also boast impressive militaries. The bulk of the Gulf states, shielded by the regional military power Saudi Arabia and under the cloak of the U.S. defense umbrella, have weaker militaries. The Human Development Index, the HDI, has a trend similar to those observed for GDP per capita, led by Norway and the Gulf states. Nigeria, Iraq, and Venezuela are at the bottom. This is also echoed in the life expectancy figures. The life expectancy at birth in Nigeria is only 54 years, compared with 83 years in Norway. Russia, long plagued by alcoholism and other social maladies, comes in with a life expectancy of only 70 years. If we examine crude oil production, the source of all this wealth, or of all the problems, we find that the Gulf bloc, the GCC, takes the top spot for oil production. Saudi Arabia controls over 50% of the Gulf bloc's oil production. The U.S. and Russia also produce a tremendous amount of oil at 32 and 23 million terajoules equivalent, respectively. Iran, plagued by sanctions, is able to produce only a modest amount of oil, similar to the level of Brazil. Venezuela, despite having the largest proven oil reserves, fares even worse. The world increasingly relies on cleaner burning natural gas. Evaluating natural gas production, we find that the Gulf countries are less dominant in this sector. The U.S. and Russia take the top spot here, with the GCC bloc coming in third place. If we combine oil and natural gas production on a terajoule basis, we find that the U.S. leads global energy production, producing 68 million terajoules of energy in 2022. The GCC bloc takes second place, anchored by Saudi Arabia, and Russia takes third. Revisiting the energy production on a per capita basis, we can take note of Qatar's tremendous amount of energy production relative to its small population. Norway, the petro-unicorn, at 1.54 terajoules per capita, is also very high. The responsible management of Norwegian natural resources by their government makes Norway one of the world's wealthiest countries. Its sovereign wealth fund, the largest in the world, is worth $325,000 per Norwegian citizen. Finally, we'll perform a 9-factor ranking to determine who is the strongest petrostate. We'll use this data to construct a points calibration curve and then use the linear regression in order to assign a score for each factor. When we total up the score, we arrive at this ranking. Russia is the strongest petrostate. This is especially the case when we consider its military strength and its vast nuclear arsenal. Norway ranks second, thanks to its very high standards of living, GDP per capita, and high human development index. Brazil ranks third due to its high GDP and population size, military strength, and its relatively low dependency of GDP on natural resources. Saudi Arabia sits in fourth place, followed by most of the other Gulf states. Iraq, Azerbaijan, Nigeria, and Venezuela are the weakest. Iran ranks in seventh place, although if it were able to escape the oppressive Western sanction regime, whether by reform or by virtue of the increasingly multipolar world, it would likely rise towards the top of the ranks. This all reminds me of a reoccurring dream. Alone and somewhere in the middle of nowhere, I stumble upon a vast treasure of gold and jewels. The excitement and elation immediately replaced with fear. I may have found this treasure, but how will I keep it? For the wolves will surely gather and conspire to relieve me of this fortune, either through cunning or force. To find yourself in the possession of vast riches, whether by sheer happenstance, can be either profoundly lucky or often fatal. If you made it this far, thanks for your attention, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Please consider giving it a like, and of course feel free to write to me in the comments your thoughts or suggestions for future videos. Have a nice day or night.